The mismatch part is so eerie. Jellyman's report number 14. Jellyman. Great shot. A code, you say? Take a break. If only you had something to crack the code. Triple XL. Are you now? Doubles down. Ah, she's doing that thing again. From episode 1. Shake hand. Shake hand instead of handshake. Yeah, I've seen that. Look who it is. Trying to make sense of it all, eh? Jalmana. Background. Ah, okay. You've got laundry as well. Oh, beautiful. A day in the life. Persistent. Hearts and everything. Yeah, she is persistent. Ooh. Oh. Okay. So he really needs the IBM 5100 now. Snorlax. Let him rest, man. A little bit. It was meant to be, eh? Look fancy. Look at this shot, though. Hey. Immediately stepped in. Rather dismissive. Just starts to give her a backstory. Okay. Oh, look at that. Now, who's her father? That was a real ocarina again. For a split moment. Now he's back to being goofy ocarina. Look at that, he dropped it. Oh, that's sweet. It was. His turn now. I love this guy, I do.
その秘密のプログラムを解明するには IBN5100 の特別な機能が必要なのだ。どうだ、驚いたか？あ、
バカみたい。聞いて損した。
気になるって言うから教えてやったのに。
パソコン？うん、古いパソコン。確か5100円くらいするとか。
5100.
もしかして。
Hold on.
まゆしはすごいことを聞いちゃったので。
携帯禁止。
ちゃんが見たことあるって。オカリンが探してるパソコン。
Is that right?
禁止。
Ferris, eh?
足りないじゃない。
Okay.
皆さん、お待たせしたにゃん。まもなくフェイリス会昼の部を始めるにゃ。
Ferris Cup. She's got a lot of fans.
なんだこの空間は。
ああ、オカリン。トゥットゥルー。
何が起きている？時空間が歪んだ。
Yeah, he's not a fan of gatherings, is he?
参戦した。
Yeah, you have to earn it.
バカなことを言うな。
But why does she know about this?
IBN5100 の
You're gonna have to enter.
オカリン勝てるん？フェイリスタンは全国レベルだ。
Is it kind of similar to Yu-Gi-Oh?
それはフェイリスにかける。
He showed up as well.
本気だにゃ。今日も。
Kyoma.
言っておくぞ。参戦した暁には知っている情報はすべて入ってもらう。
Once I've participated.
猫耳に二言はないにゃ。
参りました。
まゆしはがっかりなのです。
He participated.
何ぞ？情報は教えてもらうぞ、フェイリス。
負けたのに偉そうだにゃ。よく覚えてないにゃ。
Is that acceptable?
いや、覚えておけよ。頭脳的我が戦略を。
頭脳的っていうか汚ねっつっか。
IBN5100 はどこにある？
Keep it down, though. Keep it down.
知らないのか？
小さい頃パパが持ってたのは確かにあんだけど、今はもう
I mean, that
ないにゃ。
makes sense. That's a great shot.
それだけか？
そうにゃ。最後に見たのは確か秋葉原の
Ooh, a
神社だった
shrine.
にゃ。
神社？
質問の件だけど、教授に聞いたら確かに IBN5100
Whoa.
特殊なプログラム言語を
It's all about the IBN
ついていた。
5100.
本当だっていうの？
パソコンですか？
Oh, so
ちょっとお父さんに聞いてみないと。
this shrine.
IBN5100 だ。わからなけれ
Look
ば
at these
パ
backgrounds.
ソコンと言えばいい。
わかりました。聞いてみます。
頼む。最後に合言葉を。
うるさい。こんがり。
Gonguru.
相変わらずキャンキャンとうるさいな。
誰のせいだ、誰の？
これから柳林神社に向かおうと思ってい。
I guess that's all she needed.
聞いてくれたか？
はい。お父さんに聞いたら、
Whoa.
そのパソコン
It's
な
here.
ら確かにうちの神社に奉納されてるって。
本当か？
パソコンってもしかして IBN5100？
はい。こちらの
Quite a
方
coincidence, isn't
助手
it?
だ。それで IBN。
待て。何その適当な紹介の仕方。10秒もかからないでしょ。
マキセ・クリス助手だ。
はいはい。いいですよ
She's gave in.
で、あなたは
漆原ルカです。
Ruka.
おいくつなの？
今年で17歳です。
1個下か。
マキセさん大人っぽいですね。綺麗だし。
あ、そんな。あなたの方こそ。
お父さん呼んできます。
知らぬが仏だ。
どういう意味？
Oh, yeah. Look at that.
しかしまさか現実になるとは。
どういうことです？
いえね、奉納されに来た方から言われたんですよ。いつかこのパソコンを必要とする若者が現れるから大事に取っておくようにと。10年くらい前だったでしょう
Oh,
か。
10 years ago.
そんなことが。
2000.
まさに運命の符号。スタインズ
It's a bit more than that, my friend.
またそれか。
It's a bit more than that. Oh,
IBN5100
there it is.
ポータブルコンピューター。
これをお借りできますか？
They actually do look alike. Look at that.
感謝します。運ぶぞ、手伝え。
だが断る。
助手だろ、クリスティーナ。
助手でもないしティーナでもない。はあ？空気を読めって言った？あんたが？
仲がよろしいですね。ルカも仲良くさせてもらうんだぞ。
はい。
ちょっと待っててくださいね。
Interesting.
いいお父さんね。
そうですか？
Yeah, he noticed.
同じ失敗は繰り
Hmm.
返さない。
This is the real Okarin again. He notices these things. He picks up on things. Her father, eh?
あのさ、
なんだ
なんでもない。
おっとっとっと助手ならできるはずだ
Quick cuts
期
again.
待してくれてどうもでも無理。横歩きへ変更を求む。つうかしろ。転んじゃうから。
Oh.
Okay, so that's episode 4. You know, it's been clear for a couple of episodes now, but 4 episodes in, this anime most definitely feels really different from anything I've covered on the channel, right? There's a totally different type of mood and atmosphere and tone that it's able to create. To me, it feels really, really unique in comparison to anything else I've done on the channel. And of course, even everything else I've done on the channel feels unique in its own right in comparison to everything else. But, something about this just feels really different to me, right? And it's a good thing. It's definitely a good thing. I've been drawn to it since day one. Episode 1, I feel like it strikes a perfect balance or executes a perfect balance of, the slice of life elements and, the day in the life elements, spending the time with these characters throughout the day, right? And then, of course, on top of that, or in addition to that, you've got the plot elements, the fantastical sci-fi time travel elements and everything else associated with, that aspect of this story. But it just feels so natural, doesn't it? They're going about their day and it feels so authentic to me. And it's the thing that it's one of the biggest draws. It is one of the biggest draws at this point, 4 episodes in, just the slice of life elements of it, spending the time with these really, really likable characters. At least I find them really likable. This idea of, found family and the misfits, the character drama, even this idea of broken people kind of coming together, right? Like I said, I just adore the friendship that they have and how they kind of support each other, right? Yes, of course, it's essentially a given that it is going to take much more of a serious turn, a darker turn at some point. And, that's one of the reasons I keep saying I'm really going to savor these moments, right? Much like how these characters are going to come to, understand that, yeah, those moments, those summer days, those maybe even lazy summer days, those normal summer days, those must have been, or those used to be so precious. Just simple moments, simple times, simpler times. Because of course, things are going to escalate quite a bit at some point. They are going to get much more complicated and much more serious and all of that, right? So yeah, I'm savoring it, man. I am. And I'm enjoying the pacing of it all, right? I've got no complaints. 4 episodes in, I've enjoyed all 4 episodes. Again, for the really unique approach as well, right? Listen, the script here is fantastic. And, it kind of needs to be, doesn't it? Because the writing here is in the spotlight. It's not a flashy action anime, right? I mean, sure, it might have those action elements at some point, but it's all about the characters, the interpersonal character dynamics and relationship. And that is a major focus of this episode as well. And at this point, characters are beginning to get to know each other a bit more, beginning to understand that there's more than meets the eye, that there is so much more to this person than the initial opinions they might have formed of each other. And of course, in this case, in this specific episode, you're looking at Makise or Makise and Okarin, right? Okabe, Rintaro, Kiyoma, all that good stuff. Both of them kind of get to understand each other a bit more, right? Below the surface. Once again, you kind of get to see the other side of Okarin. It's rare, but it comes out. You get to see that he is a competent person beneath all of it, And I say beneath all of it, that aspect of it is just as engaging. He's a fantastic protagonist already, I'd say. I said at one point, I really like this guy. I do. The really playful and goofy side of Okarin, I think that's just as integral as some of the stuff I'm getting to see slowly, the person beneath. And I've held that belief for a couple of episodes now. There is a person beneath all of this that is much more serious, that is much more, I don't know, complicated or complex. And as far as a complex character is concerned, and you can look at both Makise or Makise and Okarin, depending on his or her depth of self-awareness, a complex character, usually tends to think about, or to some degree senses his or her inner incongruities, right? And the disruptions that they do end up causing or actively cause. So in his or her private realm, they know that sometimes, they see the truth of things, right? But then also at other times, they can be blind to the most obvious things. Kind of going back to, Okarin as a protagonist, I think one of the biggest draws, for me at least, so far has been, his dynamic with all the different characters, and how unique it can be with each one of them, right? Him and Mayuri, him and Daru, him and Makise, him and Ruka, him and Ferris, right? And again, it goes on and on. Him and Amane Suzaha, him and Shining Finger, him and Mr. Braun. I mean, essentially, he's kind of like the sun, isn't he? And all of these different characters, the supporting cast, are, the other planets. And of course, all the different planets have a different type of relationship with the sun. But, kind of going back to my point about the writing being in the spotlight quite a bit, because there's a lot of dialogue, I think, again, the screenplay is fantastic. It kind of needs to be as well, right? To really sell that authentic banter and the back and forth. And again, one of the most integral components of that is the chemistry between the voice actors. I think that's actually really crucial in kind of really selling that authentic nature of it. And I'm not saying that, the banter in Japanese specifically is fantastic, because of course I do not understand Japanese, but you don't need to understand the language to see it actually being presented through the voice acting. You could just hear it, through the combination of the subtitles and the voice acting, right? The back and forth. It just feels so natural. It does. The way they kind of tango with each other, the way they kind of spar with each other, it's quick, it's sharp, it's really snappy, all of that, right? And I think it's just one of the best parts of this anime so far. And yeah, ultimately that chemistry is there, right? Makise and Okarin, right? To the point that Ruka's dad thought that, okay, yeah, these are good friends. They've known each other for some time now, right? And that, that's a real thing. That's one of the reasons it feels so authentic. Let me give you an example from real life. This idea of, people meeting for the first time and almost immediately clicking. Now, of course, the time travel element is a bit of a different aspect of this, right? You go back to episode 1. Are these star-crossed lovers? Is this something that was always meant to be? Even in this episode, you have Makise or Makise, just almost regretting, though not truly, right? She might be saying it to Okarin, but, I'm sure she's content. She's happy that she did come across Okarin and that they are in contact now. But yeah, she said something like, oh, how did I get tangled up in all of this? Or rather, how did I get tangled up with this guy? But, back to my own, specific example, last year, I was on a trip to England, but, on the flight back to Canada, the person I sat beside, both of us just immediately kind of just had this, immediately started joking around and felt at ease around each other. And, I'm not saying it's a romantic thing. It wasn't. It was more so of just, connecting. And our chats ended up being full of banter. Both of us are kind of roasting each other back and forth, just having a fun time. And both of us just happen to be into a lot of the same things as well. There's conversations about Arcane and Hunter x Hunter, even Pokemon at one point, and just all kinds of other stuff, right? But, the point being, there's a natural chemistry there. Both of us knew, okay, this is the type of person both of us kind of like to talk to, right? Just have a blast, shoot the shit. So yeah, that was a fun time. So that kind of thing most definitely happens in real life. So that's why I feel that the dynamic between Makise and Okarin feels so authentic as well. That, they can roast each other almost immediately. There's great banter. And again, the back and forth, all of that. And of course, the whole slice of life, a day in the life element of this episode really allows for that, right? It allows both of these characters to be in really unique situations and even normal situations, but getting to observe each other and how they react to certain things. So yeah, both of them are also understanding now that the other one is beginning to get a different understanding for them, or at least in the beginning stages of it. Makise certainly noticed that, Okarin is picking up on some of these things about her, right? And of course, Okarin most definitely picks up on these things about her. And of course, I'll dig into all of that in a bit. But, I also want to bring up that I did check out the dub. Not for this episode, but for episode 1. I mean, yeah, quick thoughts on it. Yeah, it does kind of have this, it maintains that snappy dialogue. The screenplay is, it's great there as well, I'd say. But, I've noticed that it takes a lot of liberties. Now, that doesn't have to be, a negative, right? Because sometimes you can't do a one-to-one translation. Right, but a lot of the things that are being said there in the dub, they just feel really different. Just the conversations that are taking place, they feel different, again, because of the changes in the script. But in terms of the actual voice acting, yeah, listen, like I said a few episodes ago, even before checking out the dub, there's only one Mayuri, right? You can't replicate that. Kana Hanazawa is Mayuri. That is an integral component of that character. It's as simple as that, and it doesn't quite, for me, it doesn't quite translate into the dub. It just doesn't. It feels like a different character. To me, that feels like a night and day type thing, it's just not the same character without Hanazawa's voice acting. It's just not. And then, you have Ocarine, not bad. I don't mind it. It's still not Ocarine to me. The original is going to be Ocarine for me, of course. But yeah, it's not bad. It's certainly not like a night and day type thing, if you look at Mayuri from the original and then the English dub. The English dub is not Mayuri. I'm sorry, that's just not the character. But yeah, just thought I'll share a few thoughts about the dub, my experiences of the dub of episode 1 at least. I don't think I'll be going back. I have no need or urge to go back. But yeah, it's always good to kind of, get that experience as well. I feel like I got everything I needed just out of the one episode. But let's actually get into the episode now. The whole episode is kind of centered around the IBN 5100. Right. And of course, by the end of it, they have it in their possession. Right. That, just having it in your possession is another sort of lightning rod. Right. Because there's going to be, I don't know, eyes on you. There's going to be a lot of questions. There's already something else at play. There's people like John Teeter. Right. The mysterious John Teeter. Though, of course, as you know, I've got my theories and speculation about who it actually could be if it's not an actual separate character altogether. There's other characters like Shining Finger, who is just so persistent, right? She's just annoying the hell out of Ocarine, and she understands it. She kind of, it's reflected in her messaging as well. I hope I'm not, annoying you too much, but I really need to get in contact with this hacker. That's the one thing I kind of saw in the dub of episode 1. That thing, they spell it in a really, I don't know, interesting manner. Up until this point, I didn't quite understand it, but in the dub, he called him a hack. That was a joke there. So I guess that's how I'll kind of, look at this as well. But yeah, you've got this really mysterious person in the glasses girl, Shining Finger. I'm not quite sure if that's a reference I'm missing. I'm guessing it probably is a reference that I'm not able to understand. But yeah, she's asking about information, and then, she's even, talking about exchanging information, trading information. If you come across something, maybe you'll let me know, and if I come across something, I'll let you know, right? So you have to be suspicious of that character. You just do, right? I feel like Ocarine should be a little bit more suspicious as well. But the thing is, I say that, but Ocarine is always kind of suspicious and skeptical about these things. But the catch is, it's that playful thing that he's been doing. Goofy, playful. The not the play acting, the role playing, I suppose. Oh, is this the organization at play here? Oh, is this someone that could be from the organization, right? So, jokingly, he's almost kind of doing the right things. Always, he's always, been at it, essentially. And that's the reason I kind of said, it kind of fell into his lap. This idea of, CERN actually being someone that does end up being a major player, right? This organization, as John Teeter explains on the message boards. And then, of course, speaking of mysterious characters, you've got people like Amane Suzuha, you've got people like John Teeter, right? You do have to be suspicious. I have to be suspicious as well of these characters. Because at this point, it's still possible that this story actually ends up having a bit of a twist, their own twist on John Teeter. Maybe John Teeter is a part of CERN, right? And their take on it. It's just a possibility. You just kind of have to think of all of these possibilities. And then, of course, finally, if you go to someone like Amane Suzuha, that's yet another person of interest, right? As far as the time traveling aspect is concerned. I still have to be careful. You know, I simply cannot, overlook the possibility, even if it might end up being a slim one, that, she could be someone that is working for CERN, right? It seems rather unlikely given, the things I've kind of seen of her at this point. But, that being said, I think, Amane Suzuha, if she does end up being confirmed as a time traveler, I think she's more so on Okarin's side, right? That side of things, I suppose. But, in terms of Amane Suzuha, it kind of continues that trend of her kind of slipping up. And again, because of those, unique slip-up moments, us, the audience, can kind of, speculate about her being this potential time traveler. But, here, she gets kind of defensive, doesn't she? Because this idea of her being just a kid comes up. And, she felt the need to immediately just get defensive and let it be known that I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not a kid, I'm a full-fledged warrior. That's interesting, isn't it? But yeah, her doubling down, and again, second time she's got quite the conviction as well about it, this idea of being a full-fledged warrior. I mean, the moment she said that, and got really quite defensive about it as well. And, that right there also kind of tells you that this is something that she's kind of had to face, right? In her past or just, growing up. She's still young, right? And this idea of being called a kid, and then, thinking that, no, you're good enough, you're old enough, or you're capable enough to be this person that can pull this off, right? And if she does end up being this time traveler, yeah, she's pulling it off. She's able to, do the job. So far, at least, I suppose. So she immediately kind of, steps in, felt the need to defend herself, right? And this is the thing I meant about her potentially slipping up again, right? These moments. I mean, there's too many of these moments now to not be, just really rather suspicious of her in terms of being, a time traveler. I mean, at this point, there's more than enough there in terms of, these little moments, these slip-ups, and her commenting on certain things that are just not kind of adding up. And, again, I spoke of, transitional hinges and, tight shots of her in relation to other really, suspicious things and all of that, the timing of it being rather suspicious as well. Yeah, at this point, I think, you're meant to really, truly believe, or at least suspect that, okay, this is someone that is a time traveler. Right? I already said, I think last episode, that I'm maybe like 99% sure this is a time traveler. But, this episode adds another notch to all of that. But I thought it's kind of clever that they used warrior instead of soldier. But if they actually ended up using the term soldier, then I actually would have been much more sure that this actually could be our John Titor, Amane Suzuha, that is. Because, John Titor, the real John Titor, the hoax and all of it, in real life is meant to be a temporal soldier, right? That's a big thing about it. He's been sent back in time and all of that, right? So yeah, I thought it's interesting, the choice of the term that's actually being used here, right? A warrior. But I mean, soldier, warrior, it's not that different, is it? I feel like there's this entire aspect of this anime that can be lost for people that have no clue about John Titor, before going into this. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that everyone should know about John Titor. It's this obscure thing. Not everyone's into time travel and, the history and the hoaxes and all of that stuff and just, the mechanics of it and all. But, that's the thing. Time travel is my jam. It's my thing. Like I've said, I've got a strong grasp on the mechanics. So for that reason, this becomes even more of an enjoyable experience for someone like me, right? Who also knows about stuff like John Titor. So yeah, if you happen to know about some of these things, it really makes it much more of an enjoyable experience, right? It really allows you to access and understand and enjoy that layer that exists. But I think they've done a decent job here of making it so it doesn't feel like, people who might not know John Titor are, missing out or anything. You can just, for people who might not know that story, the hoax and all of that and the details of it, for them, it could just be a first time experience because, all the information is still given, right? The details of it. But yeah, once it's all said and done, I'll definitely go check out a few, Steins Gate reactions to see, how people who didn't know about John Titor, engage with this material. I do know that my YouTube friends over at Autosave also covered Steins Gate, so I'll probably go check theirs out. But yeah, going back to the IBN 5100, most of this episode, or the structure of this episode, is essentially kind of like a fetch quest, right? And that kind of makes sense as well, right? Because I know this is based on a visual novel, so those gaming elements or the structure of a game, it's bound to show up from time to time. As I do kind of see here, right? You go to different characters, you get different information out of these characters, and then because of that information, you're able to draw a conclusion, and then you go to the next person, there's a twist and major revelation and all of that, right? It really felt like a game. And yeah, like I said, by the end of it, they do have it in their possession. I mean, it's not back at the lab just yet. They have it. They do have it, and of course, a lot of fun stuff going on there as well. As both of them struggle to bring it home, or to the lab rather. But the fact that they do have it, and of course I'll get into how exactly they got to it, right? The whole path that's kind of laid out for them, or for Okurin specifically, to actually get to the IBN 5100 at that shrine specifically, right? From those people specifically, right? Ruka's father, because of course Ruka would have been much too young back in 2000, right? 7 to be exact, or close to 7, right? Because she said she's about to turn 17, a year younger than Makise. So yeah, Ruka's father then kind of comes into play as well, alongside Ferris's father, right? Who's also name dropped, or not name dropped, but mentioned that, oh, my father used to have it. Now at the time I said, okay, that kind of checks out, but does it really kind of check out that her father used to have one? I mean, I'm not really sure how common they used to be. I know, the functionality of the IBN 5100, or rather, how integral it is to John Teeter's story and all of that, but I didn't really ever look into the actual, technical aspects of it, or, just how common it was for people to actually have it. So that's one thing I'm not really even 100% sure about, if it is a normal thing that Ferris's dad actually had one of them. But the thing is, it brings Ferris into the whole thing as well now, right? Everything that's happened here, I brought up the fetch quest aspect of it, almost kind of like again, a breadcrumb trail that's being laid out. That idea comes in quite a bit. Until again Okurin gets to the spot, to the shrine, and he retrieves it, because again someone left it there 10 years ago, and Ruka's father is he's pleasantly surprised that it actually played out, and this young man actually showed up. And I'll come back to that aspect in a bit, but let's focus on them actually having it now. The IBN 5100, it's a blessing and a curse. It is. Because there's always a possibility, right? You simply have to be a little bit paranoid about it, right? You have to question it, that they might be unknowingly retrieving it for CERN, right? Or, to facilitate something that CERN requires. And then, of course, there's that idea of Shining Finger needing an IBN 5100, and then her possibly being John Teeter, right? If not Amane Suzaha, and if not just a third character altogether. But then, of course, if Amane Suzaha ends up being John Teeter, then yeah, John Teeter is looking for an IBN 5100 as well. But before I move on, even this whole idea of Daru hacking into the server, the email server, I suppose specifically, surely CERN must know that. I mean, I speculated about this breadcrumb trail for them to actually follow, and, opening Pandora's box and all of that. But even if that doesn't end up being the case, now surely they must know that they've been hacked, right? So that might, I don't know, put something else into motion on their end as well. And the thing is, I believe the actual CERN in real life, it was hacked at one point, but it didn't end up being anything too critical or crucial, at least, as far as the public knows. But, actually, let's kind of focus on the IBN 5100, and who donated it back in 2000, 10 years ago. Yeah. I mean, it's all connected, of course, that shrine, that specific shrine, and the people. Listen, whoever it ends up being, even if it is Okurin himself, yeah, it's all of this information is something that Okurin knows. Right? It all relates to Okurin. So if it actually ends up being Okurin himself who time travels to 2010, sorry, not 2010, to 2000, and donates the 5100, Ruka's father should be remembering that face, right? Now, again, the thing is, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know for sure, if Okurin didn't put on a disguise, he could easily have a hat on, a fake beard, who knows, right? Sure, that's a possibility. But I feel like the fact that, he didn't recognize Okurin at all as that person, you have to take that into account, in terms of who it possibly could have been 10 years ago. Whoever it is, it's someone related to Okurin, someone who's on Okurin's side, someone who understands the dynamics of all of these things, right? Possibly the things that Okurin told someone, right? And they time traveled to 2000 and did this and, stashed it, donated it. But, looking at the year itself, 10 years ago, and that year being the year 2000, it's important because John Titor was meant to have traveled to the year 2000, right? And this is meant to be from the original world line of Okurin, right? From the first half of episode 1. In that timeline, all of that existed. All of that happened. Or rather, the hoax aspect of it happened. But of course, once all of that gets switched up into a new timeline, Okurin comes to understand that, okay, all that stuff, it's happening here for the first time now. Though I don't think he still understands all of it just yet. Maybe I understand it as an audience member, but Okurin still doesn't quite know how some of these things are happening or why they're happening like this. And, in that sense, this idea of Okurin being this really unique individual, someone that seems to be exempt, the only one that appears to be exempt from the memory reconstruction aspect of it, is this something CERN knows about, right? Do they know about, this person existing out there, this really unique individual that is exempt from all of this, that has a unique experience of actually maintaining memories from a past or prior, not past, a different timeline? Is that the type of thing that could be perceived as a threat, perhaps? The possibility of that. I've got to keep that in mind as well, that he is unique and, others might kind of know about this. But going back to my point about John Titor, Okurin finds out that John Titor did not time travel back to 2000, right? In this timeline. And they tell Okurin as much, right? But, also there's that really interesting idea of John Titor actually acknowledging and understanding, oh, it's possible that you actually saw me or know me from another world line, right? And that again brought up the possibility of whoever John Titor ends up being or is, they know that this person who I'm speaking to right now is able to maintain memories from the other timeline. They know this, right? So that's another really fascinating angle to this at all times. But here's the thing, since it's time travel, just because it hasn't happened yet, right, doesn't mean it's not going to end up happening in these upcoming episodes or over the span of these 24 episodes, right? I might actually see how exactly that computer gets donated and stashed, right? I could easily, I'm sure I'll probably end up seeing all of that. Or maybe it doesn't even take that route. It could easily just be this idea of maybe going further back in time, maybe it could be 98, 99, even, maybe a little bit before 2000, and, giving it to someone, someone giving it to someone who then donates it, right? At a certain point. But, that being said, I think that, it's a little bit out of character for someone like Okurin to not just ask Ruka's father, who the person was or, what did they look like? I felt like that's something Okurin would do immediately, but he didn't. But here's the thing, as an audience member, there's dramatic irony at play. I know much more than Okurin. I know time travel is at play. So, maybe I have to take that into account, At that point, at the time Ruka's father is saying that, someone donated it and that, a young man is going to retrieve it at some point. Okurin believes it's fate. And at that point I said it's much more than that, But I need to remember that Okurin doesn't actually actively think that time travel shenanigans are at play at the moment, at least. He'll get there. Of course, he'll get there at some point. But for now, he's not really looking at it through the time travel lens. I am, though. But there's still the possibility that even our John Titor in this timeline could still actually end up going to 2000. Much like the other timeline. But, in this case, it could be to actually stash the IBN 5100. But I'm sure that much like everything else, I'll have ongoing speculation about the things at play here, right? But now that they do have it in their possession, there's this idea of, does he share that information? Shining finger and all of that, this idea of trading information. If they have it, does Okurin keep it to himself? I think they have to be careful. They do. Right. But again, next steps, they'll get to decode the code, right? CERN's server and all of that, or the coding. They've kind of run into the speed bump. They've run into Daru. Gets quite frustrated, doesn't he? But I'm sure that once they do actually manage to decode it, it might show me some interesting things, to say the least, and show them some really interesting things as well. I mean, it's already showing me some really bizarre and fascinating stuff, eerie stuff. This whole idea, it kind of picks up again from the ending of the last episode, right? Human is dead, mismatch, all of that stuff. Really, really rather eerie, isn't it? And listen, man, like I said in the last episode, this uneasy idea of, things kind of turning into gel, or at least having the appearance of gel. I've seen it in stuff like the gel nanas, right? Be it the entire batch, be it just a single banana that then kind of goes back in time and gets reattached to the bunch because of, again, the experiment they did. 2 episodes running now, it's really beginning to bring up that possibility, that really unsettling and eerie possibility of that kind of thing happening to a human, right? The gel aspect of it, and, this whole idea of mismatch and all of that. And they certainly specify that these are experiments, right? So yeah, there is a possibility here that, much like the experiments that are going on in the lab, be it Okarin and Daru and Mayuri and Makise as well, their experiments with food, things like, juicy tenders and bananas and all of that. Yeah, there's a possibility that these experiments might be happening at a different scale for CERN, right? To the point that, there's death being reported. But in terms of a new character that's kind of mentioned here in this episode, it's this idea of Makise, or Makise's father. I mean, the really specific line of dialogue there is that I won't repeat my father's failure. So, of course, immediately you begin to think about the possibility of, this character, Makise's father, playing a role in all of this as well. And, leading up to that revelation, you see that Makise is adamant that, it's all just a big mistake. She's really essentially in denial about the things that she saw. And, Okarin calls her out on that and tells her, how come you're just ignoring the things that happen? That's fact. It's fact. It happened in front of us, She's just completely against the notion of it all. Right. And even in that scene at the hotel room, you see that she's trying to make sense of it all. And you see her. She's almost kind of trying to delude herself as far as like going through the details. And she's really trying her best to explain it or come up with some kind of explanation for the things that happen right in front of her eyes. Right. And it's done a number on her. It has. And, it kind of goes back to that idea of her just getting out of there. But, going back to her kind of having that emotional moment, and, she immediately regrets it as well, that she allowed herself to get to that point and showed that side of her that, Okarin certainly picks up on, and he picks up on, more things a little bit later on as well, especially in relation to this idea of, the absent father, or the relationship with Makise's father, right? Be it observing Raku and her father and how, loving that relationship and how supporting that relationship appears to be. And just the fact that it is a relationship, that it does exist at the most basic level. You see that Makise is taking it in and, almost kind of like in a longing sense, that this has always been something that's been missing from her life. And again, Okarin picks up on it. And ultimately, even Makise realizes that Okarin has picked up on this as well. She kind of goes to bring it up right in the conclusion. And then she just kind of, drops it immediately, right? And it kind of goes back to that, playful banter aspect of it into the credits. So, I think it's fair to assume that, Makise's father was someone that was into, time travel mechanics and proving time travel, or, just believing certain things that he might have been mocked for, perhaps. And I say that because, she specified, I don't want to be repeating my father's failure, and her being so against the idea of, the possibility of time travel as well. You see the contrast there. If that is the case, that her father was kind of involved in time travel somehow, it's a great contrast, isn't it? Because they've established that Makise is all about hard science and proving things through facts. And, I even see that as she has a go at Okarin in episode 2. She dismantles everything he had to say, right, about time travel and the possibilities of it in episode 2, right? It's a great scene. It cuts back and forth as she's being really quite cheeky as well, using that name Kiyoma, or the first part of it, right, Hohin. But yeah, going back to the possibility of her father, whoever that ends up being. And listen, in terms of relations, I've said it since day one, it's possible some of these people are related and they just don't even know it yet, right? So maybe I've already seen Maxe's father. That is a possibility, you know. But this possibility of her father possibly being obsessed, or maybe he used to be obsessed with the idea of proving it, consumed by it, this idea of time travel existing. You could even see how someone like Ocarine might remind her of her own father, right? Now I'm not saying, there's a possibility that Ocarine could be her father. That's just really out there. I mean that'd be really bizarre. Really bizarre. But you never know. You never know. Listen, it's not something I'm going to latch onto or anything, but let's kind of file that under something that could be exceedingly unlikely, but you can't completely rule it out either, right? And at that point, you do get to see the real Ocarine kind of shine through again, right? He observes that, okay, this is a bit of a sensitive topic, bit of a personal topic for Makise, that there's just so much more to it, right? And then again, he later finds out, and he probably has enough by the end of it that, okay, this all kind of comes down to her relationship or lack of relationship with her own father, right? Again, observing Ruka and her father as well. And the thing I love here is that this guy, I really adore Ocarine. You see that he puts on that act again on purpose, right? He begins to joke about it. He's like, "Oh, I did that on purpose to get the reaction out of you," right? But no, that's not the case. He's essentially just being a good person at that point. He's trying to introduce a bit of levity and make it less awkward, and he's essentially giving her an out, right, from that moment specifically. And at that point, he drops it and he apologizes for, forcing her to join the club. And yeah, it's really rather mature, isn't it? And, Makise gets to see that side of Ocarine as well. And of course, there's a really cool moment and a lovely moment as well, He tells her that lab number 4 or lab member number 4 status is always set aside for her. And he essentially ends up taking up, that approach of, the door is always open. Right? If you do ever want to come back. Begins to walk out, but she stops him, and again, more banter, more fun stuff. I love how, he and I love how, he actually meant that, he's sincere about it, but also, he understands that this is a really cool moment for me as well, to walk out after that. I love that. But, the thing is, if indeed, her father is someone that is kind of obsessed or was obsessed with time travel mechanics and proving it and all of that, and then, potentially being ostracized for it. But you see that even Makise or Makise does have that in her, right? A part of her is drawn to all of this. It simply is. A part of her is most definitely drawn to Ocarine as well. Why did I have to be so curious about this? It's just in her nature. Isn't it? She is drawn to all of this. And there's moments, throughout this episode, I suppose, a couple of times, she does this thing of almost kind of like she also slips up like Amane Suzuha, and then she immediately just shuts up about it. And, one of these moments or slip-up moments that comes to mind is of them being in the alley, Ocarine and Makise, she got a little too comfortable. Right. At one point, she's, having this back and forth, and then, the way she spoke, or at least the way the subtitles are presented, and then her realizing that she's opening up a little too much, she immediately pulls it back. Right. And at that point, Okarine's like, huh, what? But yeah, by the end of this episode, or, throughout the day, Makise begins to understand that, okay, Ocarine is much more than meets the eye. This is a competent person. And yeah, ultimately she's drawn to him as well. She just is. And yeah, that idea of these being, potential lovers, that's kind of been at play since day one. But let's shift the focus to Mayuri, essentially the beating heart of this story. Right, this constant for Ocarine, to the point that 4 episodes in now, I get this feeling that, as long as Mayuri is around Ocarine, to him, it's almost kind of like this thing that grounds him. I don't know, man. Just as long as he has Mayuri, it feels like he's good, right? That's the feeling I'm getting here 4 episodes in. And, through Mayuri, I've seen on a few occasions now, I get to see the real Ocarine below as well, right? In this one, she does the thing again, and, it's got a really specific name, the Stardust Shake Hand. Now, I'm not sure if that's a translation thing or if it's actually meant to say that. I saw it initially back in episode 1. I mean, not just in episode 1, in the beginning stages of episode 1 of the whole series as well. Reaching to the stars. And, again, in this one, they show me her doing that in front of a grave again. So now, it kind of doubles down on that idea of a loved one that's passed on. And, it's essentially it's, I mean, yeah, naturally it has impacted Mayuri quite a bit. So to me, it almost kind of begins to feel like, her reaching out to the stars, to the cosmos, it's perhaps, this notion of her, wanting to connect with that specific loved one again, right? Joining that loved one again, possibly getting to meet them again, right? Connecting again. But again, that's based on the assumption that she's been doing this since the death of this relative. And, that's why they kind of showed me that exact same shot in front of the grave twice now. But, again, Okarin's known her forever, they're childhood friends. So maybe it's something she's always done, even before the death, that they keep showcasing, right? Or bringing up, or the grave rather, that she's standing in front of. But yeah, that shot of her standing in front of the grave and again, reaching out, that to me really kind of feels like this spiritual connection that she's trying to have, right? Or maintain with that loved one. But, as far as the fetch quest aspect of this and, the IBN 5100, the breakthrough moment actually happens because of Mayuri. Because Mayuri brings it up with Ferris. I mean, there's a really fun and wholesome moment there, right? She's like, yeah, I think it's some kind of old or retro PC that costs about 5,100 yen. But, that's crucial. Her bringing that up to Ferris facilitates the rest of it. It kind of keeps moving it along, right? That breadcrumb trail, I suppose. So even Ferris and her knowledge and, this idea of her father having one back in the day, that's a big part of this, right? And, Okarin ultimately coming across the 5100 at the shrine because it's Ferris who tells him or specifies the last time I saw one was at the shrine. Now, is that just a random thing? She happened to be at that shrine and I suppose a lot of people go there and, they look around in those places. Like, it's kind of like a storage unit at the shrine, right? Or a storage area. So did Ferris just kind of find herself in there? And, it's kind of tucked away in a box as well. So, at this point, I think it's clear that even Ferris is a part of it. I mean, all of them are part of it, Hell, there's still that one character that I met back in episode 1, Dr. Nakabachi. I haven't seen him since episode 1. I'm sure he'll come back in at some point. So yeah, at this point, Ferris and her father have also landed on the radar, right? In terms of their part in the grand scheme of things as well. And, as I sign off, I'm beginning to think that there's actually some Doc Brown inspiration. It really does feel like it now. Okarin and his lab coat, him being this mad scientist trope, and him running around town and all of that. And for those who might not know, I'm speaking of a character from Back to the Future. Okay, so if you enjoyed that, consider dropping a like. And it takes a split second and you really can help just by dropping a like and dropping a comment, because engagement really helps the content kind of get noticed and kind of get pushed out there, the algorithm and all of that. But yeah, do share your thoughts. If you're interested in early access or timer-based full length or full opacity, consider checking out the Patreon page and, potentially supporting the channel as well in that capacity. Links are in the description and the pinned comment. Also links to social media if that's your thing. Right then, thank you so much for joining me, folks, and thank you for your time because time is precious. It really is. And I do hope to see you again soon for episode 5. Until then, take it easy.